The desert sun, even in late afternoon, was a brutal, shimmering orange as the bus pulled into Las Vegas. Sarah Jenkins pressed her nose against the cool window, her breath fogging the glass, and stared. Neon signs, still dim against the dying light, began to flicker to life like digital constellations. It wasn't just a city. It was an electric dream. A carnival spun from light and sound, promising anything and everything. For a girl from a quiet town in Ohio where the biggest excitement was the Friday night high school football game, Vegas was a shock to the system, and Sarah loved it instantly. Her guitar, a well-loved acoustic with a few dings and scratches, was tucked safely in the bus's luggage compartment. It was her constant companion, her confidant, the keeper of all her secrets and dreams. Sarah had been playing since she was 8, plucking out simple chords, then moving on to learning every classic rock riff she could get her hands on. But it wasn't just playing, it was writing. Her notebooks were filled with lyrics, melodies, half-finished, songs that spilled out of her like confessions. Her biggest dream, the one that hummed beneath every strum of her guitar, was to write songs that truly mattered, songs that could touch someone's soul, the way the King's songs touched hers. And that was why she was here. Not just for the blinding lights and the promise of adventure, but for Elvis Presley, the King. He was playing at the International Hotel, a string of sold-out shows, and Sarah had somehow miraculously snagged a ticket for the very last night. It was an extravagant splurge, a year's worth of saved allowance and babysitting money, but she knew it would be worth it. To see him, to feel the energy of his presence, was a pilgrimage. But the ticket wasn't the only reason. Sarah had an even wilder, crazier scheme. Through a distant, incredibly lucky connection, her aunt's cousin knew someone who knew someone in hotel management. She'd landed a temporary gig. She wasn't singing, wasn't playing, wasn't performing. She was going to be a runner, a general assistant for the hotel's stage crew. It wasn't glamorous. It probably meant fetching coffee, carrying boxes, and staying out of the way. But it meant backstage. It meant being in the same building, breathing the same air as Elvis Presley. She clutched the worn envelope in her hand, the one containing her confirmation and a map of the hotel. Her heart thumped a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She was only 18, fresh out of high school. And here she was in the heart of Vegas, about to step into a world she'd only ever dreamed about. Felt like walking onto the set of a movie, a grand, glittering spectacle where anything was possible. Her first task was to check in at the staff entrance. It was a stark contrast to the opulent main lobby. A bare corridor leading to a small, cluttered office. A burly man with a thick mustache and a permanent scowl looked up from a newspaper as she nervously presented her letter. "Jenkins? Huh," he grunted, his voice surprisingly deep. "You're the new temporary help, Mr. Henderson. Don't touch anything unless I tell you. Don't get in anyone's way. And don't bother the talent." He eyed her guitar case, which she'd carefully kept strapped to her back. "That's not coming backstage." Sarah's face fell. "Oh, no, sir, I understand. It'll stay in my room." Mr. Henderson just nodded. Already turning back to his paper, he handed her a laminated pass on a lanyard. "Wear this at all times, lose it, and you're out. Your shift starts tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. Be ready for anything." "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her voice a little too enthusiastic. She turned, clutching the pass like a golden ticket, a wide smile breaking across her face. Even Mr. Henderson's gruffness couldn't dampen her spirits. She had a pass, she was in. She found her way to the small functional staff dormitory provided by the hotel, a room with a single bed and a tiny desk. It wasn't much, but it was a place to call her own for the next few days. She carefully placed her guitar case under the bed, a silent promise that it would be heard someday. That evening, unable to contain her excitement, Sarah wandered to the edges of the hotel's casino floor. The air was thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and the clatter of slot machines. People in glittering dresses and sharp suits laughed, their voices echoing over the insistent jingle of coins. It was overwhelming, dazzling, almost too much to take in, but amidst the chaos, Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose. She was part of the machine, however small, that made this magic happen. As night deepened, and the neon lights outside truly took over, painting the desert sky in electric hues, Sarah found herself gazing at the grand ballroom doors. Behind those doors, Elvis Presley would sing. Tomorrow she would be backstaged in the heart of it all. Sleep was a long way off. Her mind hummed with the possibilities, with the music already playing in her head. She was here in Vegas, and her dream felt closer than ever before. This wasn't just a job. It was an education, a chance to learn from the greatest. She just had to be ready to listen. The next morning, Sarah was up before her alarm, the excitement, a restless energy in her bones. She dressed in the plain black uniform provided by the hotel's simple pants and a dark polo shirt, and pinned her new laminated pass to her chest. At 7:55 a.m., she was at Mr. Henderson's office, ready for duty. He barely looked up, just pointed a meaty finger towards a stack of empty crates. "Take those to storage down at the end of the hall, near the loading dock. Don't drop them," he mumbled around a mouthful of donut. Sarah nodded eagerly, grabbing a stack of the surprisingly heavy wooden crates. This was it, her first real task, box. The loading dock area was a symphony of sounds, the rumble of trucks, the clatter of equipment being moved, the shouts of crew members. It was grittier than she'd imagined, less glamorous than the casino floor, but infinitely more fascinating. This was where the real work happened, where the magic was assembled piece by painstaking piece. She passed by open doors, catching glimpses of wires snaking across floors, road cases stacked higher than her head, and the dim cavern of the empty stage, awaiting its star. The air hummed with the scent of sawdust, new electronics, and the lingering aroma of coffee. It was chaotic, but it was an organized chaos, a well-oiled machine getting ready for a massive performance. As she ferried crates, then helped sort cables, then was sent to fetch more coffee, Sarah tried to be a sponge, absorbing every detail. She saw technicians hunched over mixing boards, their faces lit by the glow of screens. She saw stagehands, muscular and efficient, maneuvering heavy speakers with surprising grace. Everyone moved with a purpose, a quiet intensity. This wasn't just a job for them. It was a craft. She started recognizing faces from photos she'd seen of Elvis's band. James Burton, the legendary guitarist, walked by, his hands already hovering over an air guitar, as if anticipating the next riff. Ronnie Tutt, the drummer, was sharing a joke with a sound engineer, his laugh booming through the hall. Sarah felt a thrill run through her. These were the legends, the people who helped create the music she adored. She tried to appear calm, professional. "Buddingtons, get over here," Mr. Henderson barked, snapping her out of her awe. He pointed to a pile of mic stands. "These need to be polished, and don't scuff them." As she meticulously wiped down each stand, making sure it gleamed, she thought about all the voices these microphones had carried. Soon one of them would carry the voice of Elvis Presley. The thought made her hands tremble slightly. Later in the day, after a quick lunch break in the staff cafeteria, a blur of hurried conversations and lukewarm food, Sarah was back in the main backstage corridor. She was sent to collect some laundry bags, specifically the ones marked dressing rooms. Her heart hammered. This was it. She might actually see him. She approached the dressing room corridor cautiously, her eyes darting around. It was quieter here, carpeted a sense of hushed anticipation. Security guards stood at intervals, their presence a quiet warning. As she neared the dressing room designated for Elvis, marked with a simple, elegant star, she heard voices, low, murmuring tones, and then for the first time, it was just talking. A deep, resonant baritone, unmistakable. He sounded a little tired, a little gruff, perhaps discussing the schedule with someone. Sarah froze, clutching the laundry bags. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The voice was so familiar, from records, from interviews, but hearing it live just steps away was a completely different experience. It was real. He was real. A door creaked open slightly, and Sarah saw him. Not the Elvis of the movies, not the dazzling showman of the stage. This was a man in a simple black shirt, his hair a little messy, a hint of weariness in his eyes. He was taller than she expected, broader. He laughed at something someone said, a deep, easy rumble that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. He wasn't looking her way, focused on the person he was talking to, but for a split second, Sarah felt the sheer power of his presence, even in a casual moment. Then the door closed again, and he was gone. Sarah let out a slow breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands were clammy. She managed to collect the laundry, her heart still thumping. She hadn't interacted with him, hadn't even been noticed, but she had seen him, the king, just being a person, a few feet away. The rest of the day passed in a blur of mundane tasks. But everything felt different now. The air hummed with a new kind of electricity. She felt like she was on the cusp of something extraordinary. Tomorrow was the sound check. Tomorrow she would be closer to the stage. Tomorrow she would hear him sing, even if it was just for a few precious moments. The anticipation was a physical ache, a thrilling promise of the incredible performance to come. The morning of the sound check dawned with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the frantic, scattered chaos of equipment set up anymore. Today, there was a focused hum, a palpable tension in the air, like a string being slowly tightened before being plucked. Sarah felt it too, a nervous flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with immense excitement. "Jenkins," he called, "you're with me today. We're getting the stage ready for the sound check. Pay attention. Learn something." Sarah's eyes widened. Yes, sir. This was exactly what she'd hoped for. Being right there on the stage. They walked into the colossal ballroom, which felt even bigger when empty. The seats were unoccupied, rows and rows of silent chairs, waiting for the night's adoring crowd. The stage, however, was alive. Lights hung from the ceiling. Massive rigs that looked like alien spacecraft bathing the performance area in a cool technical glow. Technicians were on ladders, adjusting angles, shouting directions. Microphones stood like sentinels, dozens of them ready to capture every note, every word. "Okay, Jenkins," Mr. Henderson said, handing her a small toolkit. "We need to go over the mic stands again, make sure they're all locked, no wobbles, and run a quick check on the cables. Any phrase, you mark it. Safety first." Sarah nodded, her heart doing a happy little jig. She moved around the stage methodically, checking each microphone stand, testing its stability, ensuring the height adjustments were smooth. Her fingers, usually clumsy when nervous, moved with surprising agility as she coiled cables, feeling the smooth rubber, checking for kinks. She imagined James Burton gripping the neck of his guitar, her own fingers tracing the path of a cable that would carry his sound. She pictured Ronnie Tutt behind the drums, the powerful rhythm flowing through these very wires. The band members began to filter onto the stage one by one. They weren't in their stage costumes yet. Mostly casual clothes, jeans, t-shirts, some with coffee cups in hand. They greeted each other with easy camaraderie, the comfortable banter of people who had spent years, decades even, playing together. Their presence filled the vast space, even before they touched their instruments. "Morning, fellas," Mr. Henderson called out, waving. "Morning, Art," James Burton replied, his guitar already plugged in. The faint hum of an amp warming up audible. He plucked a few soft exploratory notes, a bluesy riff that resonated perfectly in the empty hall. It was a simple sound, but it felt like a promise. Ronnie Tutt settled behind his drum kit, tapping a rhythm on his snare drum. It wasn't loud, just a quiet, thoughtful beat, but Sarah could feel the power in his hands even then. The bassist, Jerry Sheff, tuned his instrument with quiet concentration. Larry Moholbarak, the piano player, ran his fingers over the keys, a soft melody filling the air. Then a sudden burst of jazz chords. A joyful explosion of sound. The air thrummed with the sounds of instruments coming alive, testing the waters. A guitar riff here, a drum roll there, a vocal warm-up from a backup singer. It was a symphony of preparation, each element getting ready for the whole. Sarah felt like she was watching a massive, intricate clock being wound up piece by intricate piece for an important moment. The sound engineers were in constant communication, voices crackling over headsets. Check on the main vocal mic. Elvis's. Is it hot? Bring up the bass a little on monitor. 2. Testing percussion. 5, 4, 3. Sarah found herself standing near the main vocal microphone, the one in the center of the stage, positioned perfectly for the king. It was a classic heavy chrome mic, gleaming under the stage lights. She imagined his hand wrapping around it, his lips just inches away. It felt sacred. A hush fell over the crew on stage. The casual chatter died down. The musicians continued their warm-ups, but their eyes kept flicking towards the stage entrance. Mr. Henderson checked his watch, then adjusted his headset. He's on his way, a voice crackled through the comms. Sarah's breath hitched. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for, the reason she had traveled across the country. Her hands, which had been so steady polishing mics, now felt a little shaky. The vast, empty ballroom suddenly felt very small, the air thick with anticipation. Every ear was tuned, every eye fixed on that entrance. This wasn't just a sound check. It was the prelude to something legendary. The energy was electric, vibrating from the stage out into the silent, waiting seats. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the moment sink in the promise of the music about to fill this space, about to touch her in a way she knew would change everything. A low murmur spread through the backstage area, a ripple of quiet acknowledgement. A moment later, the stage door opened and he was there. Elvis Presley. He wasn't in his famous jumpsuits, not yet. He was dressed simply. Dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, open at the collar, and a lightweight unbuttoned jacket. His hair was impeccably styled, a dark wave swept back from his forehead, and his sideburns were perfectly shaped. He wore dark sunglasses which hid his eyes. But even without seeing them, his presence was undeniable. It wasn't just physical size. It was an aura, a radiating energy that commanded attention without him even trying. He walked onto the stage with an unhurried, almost weary stride. He looked a little tired, perhaps. The grind of the Vegas shows, the constant demand, the relentless schedule. It was visible in the slight slump of his shoulders, the way he carried himself. He wasn't the explosive, hip, swiveling performer yet. He was simply the man Elvis Aaron Presley walking into his workspace. Sarah, who was still by the main vocal mic, felt her heart give a mighty lurch. She instinctively tried to make herself smaller, to be invisible, as if too much direct observation might break the spell. She just wanted to witness, to absorb. He greeted his band members with a nod and a quiet word, a knowing smile flickering across his lips. "Morning, fellas," he murmured, his voice a little deeper than she'd heard it on records. A rich, smooth timbre, even in casual conversation. He exchanged a quick word with the sound engineer, pointing towards the monitor. "Let's get this right tonight, Bobby. Don't want any surprises." There was a quiet authority in his voice, not demanding, but certain. He knew exactly what he wanted, what he needed. He was a professional, a master of his craft. He walked straight to the center microphone, the one Sarah had been polishing. He took it in his hand, his fingers wrapping around the chrome, a natural, practiced movement. He tapped it once gently. "Check. 1, 2, he said, his voice surprisingly soft, almost conversational. "Testing." Then he began to hum a deep, resonant sound that filled the empty ballroom. It wasn't a song, just a series of scales, warm-ups, testing the range and power of his instrument. His eyes, still hidden behind the dark glasses, seemed to be focused inward, listening to himself, making adjustments. "Can I get a little more in the monitors, please?" he asked, his voice now a little stronger, and a touch more reverb. The sound engineers adjusted, and his voice deepened, gaining a rich, echoing quality. Continued his warm-ups, moving from low notes that vibrated in Sarah's chest to high, powerful notes that soared through the vast space. Even these simple vocal exercises were mesmerizing. Control, the range, the sheer power of his voice was astounding. It wasn't just singing. It was a physical force capable of filling every corner of the room, of wrapping around you and pulling you in. Sarah stood frozen, clutching the rag she'd been using to polish the muck stand, her eyes fixed on him. She could feel the vibrations of his voice in the floor in her own bones. This wasn't the recorded version, perfectly mixed and mastered. This was raw, live, unfiltered. It was real. He ran through a few more vocal exercises, then hummed a few lines of an old blues tune, his voice taking on a soulful, gravelly edge. It was easy, effortless, but packed with emotion. He wasn't performing for anyone. He was simply preparing, connecting with his voice, with the music. After a few minutes, he straightened up, took off his sunglasses and placed them on a nearby stool. His eyes, a striking blue, scanned the room, almost making eye contact with Sarah for a fleeting second before moving on. She felt a jolt, a sudden awareness that he was a person just like her, standing on a stage preparing to do something extraordinary. He cleared his throat. "Okay, fellas," he said, turning to the band. "Let's run Suspicious Minds first. Just the instrumental. Get the levels right. Then we'll go through the vocals." The band members nodded, their faces serious. Comfortable banter was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. The moment of casual entry was over. The work was beginning. And Sarah, an invisible witness, was right there to see it all unfold. The opening chords of Suspicious Minds blasted through the ballroom, raw and powerful. It wasn't the polished radio-ready version, but something rawer, more immediate. James Burton's guitar sliced through the air with its signature sharp, electrifying riffs. Ronnie Tutt's drums laid down a relentless driving beat that made Sarah's pulse pound in time. Jerry Sheff's bass provided a deep, groovy foundation, and Larry Mahobarak's piano added rich, vibrant layers. Elvis stood center stage, his stance relaxed, but ready. He wasn't singing yet, just listening, nodding his head to the rhythm, his eyes closed for a moment, as if truly feeling the music. The band played through the instrumental break, their collective sound filling the vast hall, bouncing off the empty seats. It was loud, intense, and absolutely mesmerizing. Sarah could feel the energy radiating from the stage, a wave of pure rock and roll. The sound engineers were busy in the booth, their heads bowed, faders moving up and down. They were shaping the sound, trying to find the perfect balance for the complex layers of instruments and vocals. Occasionally, a voice would crackle over the intercom, "More guitar in the right monitor," or "Bring down the drums on the left a little." When the instrumental section finished, Elvis opened his eyes. He motioned to the band. "All right, let's try the vocals now, just the first verse and chorus." The music kicked in again, and this time Elvis began to sing. "We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out." His voice, even in the casual setting of a soundcheck, was a force of nature. It was rich, resonant, full of the soulful power that had made him famous. He wasn't giving a full performance, no grand gestures or dramatic poses. He was just singing, testing his microphone, adjusting his earpiece, listening intently to himself in the monitors. But even in this utilitarian context, the emotions seeped through. The longing, the desperation, the raw vulnerability of the lyrics. It was all there. Even in a rehearsal, "I can't help falling in love with you," he sang a line from his famous ballad, switching songs to test different vocal ranges. Change was seamless, his voice adapting from the powerful rock of Suspicious Minds to the tender romanticism of the ballad. He moved effortlessly between genres, a true chameleon of sound. He stopped mid-sentence. "Hold up," he said, holding up a hand. "I'm not hearing myself enough in the wedge. Can you bump my vocal up a bit, Bobby?" Bobby, the sound engineer, gave a thumbs up from the booth, and a moment later, Elvis nodded satisfied. He continued singing, testing his range, hitting high notes with ease, then dropping to a low, rumbling baritone that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. It was a master at work, fine-tuning his instrument, ensuring every nuance of his voice would be heard perfectly by the thousands who would fill this room. Later, Sarah, still observing from the side of the stage, was completely captivated. She understood the technicality of what was happening, adjusting levels, checking frequencies, but what struck her most was the sheer dedication. Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a craftsman, meticulously perfecting his sound, treating his voice as the most precious instrument of all. He was deeply invested, even in these mundane moments. He ran through snippets of a few more songs, Blue Suede Shoes, a blast of pure rock and roll energy, followed by a tender, melancholic verse from Can't Help Falling in Love. Each time he'd stop, offer a quick adjustment, or nod his approval before moving on. There was a quiet intensity about him, a focus that was absolute. He leaned into the microphone. Okay, fellas, that's good for the levels on those. We're sounding tight. Let's try something different now. He looked out into the empty seats as if searching for something. I want to try American Trion. Let's give it a full run-through. Get the choir mics up. The band members exchanged glances, then nodded, a deeper seriousness settling over them. American Trion wasn't just a song. It was a powerful, spherical anthem, a medley of 3 American folk songs that became a signature piece of his live show. It was a song of immense emotion and theatricality. This was a deeper dive, a prelude to something truly profound. The powerful opening notes of American Trion filled the ballroom. The majestic sound of the orchestra and the swelling voices of the backing choir, though only a handful were present for the soundcheck, resonated through the hall. This wasn't a casual rock and roll tune, it was an anthem, a deeply emotional and patriotic piece that Elvis had poured his soul into during his live show. Elvis began to sing, his voice strong and clear. Oh, I wish I was in Dixie, away, away. But as he reached the second line, his voice faltered slightly, cleared his throat, tried to continue, but the power seemed to drain from him. He stopped abruptly, the music dying down to a murmur as the band, accustomed to his cues, paused. He ran a hand through his hair, turning away from the microphone, his back to the band. Sarah, still standing near the edge of the stage, saw his shoulders slump. There was a raw vulnerability in the gesture, a visible weariness that tugged at her heart. He wasn't the king in that moment. He was just a man battling something internal. Damn it, he muttered, his voice low, just barely audible. He walked over to the edge of the stage, away from the band, and leaned against a monitor speaker. His head bowed. He took a deep, shaky breath. The silence on stage was profound. No one moved. The band members exchanged worried glances, their instruments momentarily forgotten. Even Mr. Henderson, usually so stoic, stood still, his eyes fixed on Elvis. After a long moment, Elvis straightened up, but he didn't turn back to the mic. He spoke not to anyone in particular, but almost to himself, his voice tinged with a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. Sometimes it just feels like too much, he said, his voice husky. Every night, the lights, the smiles, the expectations, always the same songs, the same moves. You give, and sometimes you just feel empty. Sarah's breath hitched. She had never imagined him, the mighty Elvis Presley, feeling this way. From the outside, he was invincible, untouchable, living a life of endless adoration. But here, in the quiet intimacy of the soundcheck, she saw the heavy weight of that fame, the toll it took. It was a startling, powerful confession. He turned slowly, facing the band, a strained smile on his face. Sorry, fellas, he said, running a hand over his face. Just a moment there. Too much on the mind. He shook his head. It's not the song. The song's beautiful. It's just finding the heart for it sometimes. He walked back to the microphone slowly, deliberately. He picked up the sunglasses he'd set down earlier, put them on, hiding his eyes once more. It was like he was putting on a shield, preparing to face the music again, but Sarah had seen the raw honesty beneath. Let's try a different one, he said, his voice regaining some of its usual resonance, but a fragile quality remained. Forget trilogy for a minute. Let's do something simpler, something that just feels right, something real. He paused, then looked at the band, a request in his eyes. "Do you know Amazing Grace?" he asked, his voice softer, almost a plea. "Just the melody, no big production, just the truth of it." The band members looked at each other surprised. Amazing? Grace wasn't on the set list. It was a hymn, a spiritual, not a typical Vegas showstopper. There was something in his voice, something in the way he asked that made them nod. Ronnie Tutt picked up his drumsticks, but held them gently, ready for a soft, reverent beat. James Burton adjusted his guitar, preparing for a more mellow, soulful tone. Sarah felt a thrill, a deep sense of privilege. This was an unscripted moment, a spontaneous turn born out of raw vulnerability. This wasn't the king preparing for a performance. This was a man searching for solace, reaching for something pure. She knew in that moment that this was going to be the most powerful performance she would ever witness. First notes of Amazing Grace floated through the vast empty ballroom. A gentle, reverent melody from Larry Mahobrak's piano. It was a stark contrast to the driving rock of Suspicious Minds or the grand orchestration of American Terrai. This was simple, pure, stripped down. James Burton added a soft, mournful guitar line, a delicate echo of the melody, and Ronnie Tutt provided a barely there brushed drum beat that simply held the rhythm without imposing on it. Elvis stood at the microphone, his sunglasses still on his head, slightly bowed, took a deep breath, and then his voice, a raw, almost trembling baritone, filled the space. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. There was no showmanship, no vocal acrobatics, no pretense. This was not the king performing for a crowd. This was a man pouring his soul into a song, a prayer, a moment of profound vulnerability. His voice was husky, tinged with a weariness that had been so apparent just moments before, but it also held a newfound depth, a poignant honesty that sent shivers down Sarah's spine, that saved a wretch like me. He closed his eyes as he sang, his face reflecting a quiet internal struggle, a deep search for something. His hands, usually expressive and active, hung loosely at his side. He wasn't reaching for the high notes or pushing for power. He was simply letting the words flow, letting the melody carry him. It was incredibly intimate, as if he had forgotten anyone else was in the room. He was singing for himself, for his own weary spirit. The band members, usually so animated, were perfectly still, their expressions rapt. They were not just playing. They were accompanying, supporting, listening with an almost reverential respect. The sound engineers in the booth were quiet, their movements minimal, as if afraid to disturb the fragile beauty of the moment. Even Mr. Henderson, who had moved to stand beside Sarah, seemed to hold his breath. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't just the beauty of the song or the legendary voice singing it. It was the naked honesty of the performance. This wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was human. It was raw. And in its rawness, it held more power than any meticulously choreographed stage show. I once was lost, but now am found. His voice swelled slightly on these lines, a hint of hope, a plea for redemption. Quiet strength he projected in that moment was breathtaking. It was a testament to the power of music, not as entertainment, but as a balm for the soul, a way to connect with something deeper, something sacred. Was blind, but now I see. The final notes of the piano faded into the vast silence of the ballroom. The last echo of Elvis's voice hung in the air for a long moment, resonating with a quiet intensity that was almost painful. The stillness that followed was profound, deeper than any silence Sarah had ever experienced. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone present has been touched, moved fundamentally, shifted by something extraordinary. Elvis stood motionless for a beat, his eyes still closed, then very slowly, he opened them. He looked out into the empty seats, then around the stage, as if blinking himself back to the present, back to the reality of the soundcheck. His gaze swept over the band, then the crew, and for a fleeting, electrifying moment his eyes met Sarah's. It was just a glance, perhaps less than a second, but in that glance Sarah felt an acknowledgement, a connection. Not the king, looking at a lowly stagehand, but one human soul looking at another, sharing a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. To music, there was a depth in his blue eyes, a quiet understanding, a vulnerability that transcended fame and spectacle. He didn't smile, he didn't nod. He simply looked, then turned his gaze away as if the moment was too fragile to be prolonged. But for Sarah, it was a profound, life-altering experience. She had witnessed something truly special, something not meant for the masses, but for the quiet, hidden spaces of the heart. This wasn't just the king. This was the artist, the man bearing his soul. And it was the most powerful performance she could ever imagine. The silence that followed the last note of Amazing Grace was immense, thick with the lingering emotion of the song. Sarah felt it pressing in on her, a profound stillness that resonated deep within her chest. She hadn't moved a muscle, completely mesmerized, her heart aching, with a blend of awe and a strange shared vulnerability. Elvis slowly took off his sunglasses, placing them on the mic stand. His blue eyes, now fully visible, seemed clearer, more focused than when he had first walked onto the stage. He looked tired, yes, but also lighter, as if a great weight had been momentarily lifted. He ran a hand through his hair, a small private gesture. He looked at the band, a faint, almost shy smile touching his lips. "Thank you, fellas," he said, his voice still soft, but now with a hint of renewed strength. That felt good. Needed that. The band members nodded, their expressions mirroring his, a quiet understanding passing between them. They knew what they had just witnessed, what they had just been a part of. It wasn't just a song, it was a communion, a moment of profound connection. Elvis turned to the sound booth. "Bobby, how are the levels on that? Did it come through all right?" Bobby, the engineer, gave a thumbs up, his voice unusually quiet when he replied. "Clear as a bell, Elvis. Perfect." Elvis nodded, a faint hum of the hymn still seeming to reverberate in the air around him. He took a sip from a water bottle that a stagehand quickly handed him. Practicalities of the soundcheck were slowly reasserting themselves, but the atmosphere on stage had fundamentally shifted. The tension was gone, replaced by a sense of calm, a deeper sense of purpose. Sarah remained still, absorbing every detail. The shared glance with Elvis earlier replayed in her mind a powerful loop. It wasn't just that he had looked at her. It was the depth of understanding in his eyes, the brief, intense connection that suggested he knew she had truly listened, truly felt what he was offering. In that moment, it was a secret, shared, a silent acknowledgement of the raw, vulnerable humanity that had just been laid bare, or fame anymore. This was about the pure, unadulterated power of music. Sarah had always loved music, had always wanted to write songs that resonated, but she hadn't fully understood how to achieve that. She'd thought it was about clever lyrics, catchy melodies, impressive vocal runs. Now she realized it was about something far deeper. It was about honesty. It was about allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to lay bare your soul even if it hurt. Her own aspirations suddenly felt clearer, sharpened by the experience. It wasn't enough to just write a good song. You had to imbue it with your true self, your authentic emotions, your struggles and your hopes. That was where the real power lay, the power to move others, to connect on a level beyond words. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, had shown her that in the most unexpected and intimate way possible. A soft cough from beside her made Sarah jump. Mr. Henderson was standing there, his gruff exterior softened by something in his eyes. He must have seen her reaction, seen the tears that had briefly welled up. "You all right there, Jenkins?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with emotion. She wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. "Yes, sir," she finally managed, her voice a little shaky. "Just wow, Mr. Hender," just grunted. But it wasn't an annoyed grunt, it was almost underhanding. He had seen countless sound checks, countless performances, but even he had seemed captivated by this one. "He's got away with a hymn, doesn't he?" he murmured, almost to himself. "Gets right to you." Sarah simply nodded, her gaze fixed on Elvis, who was now consulting with his manager. a faint smile on his face. The transformation was subtle, but undeniable. He looked refreshed, invigorated, ready to face the world again. The raw, vulnerable moment had passed, but its echo remained. A powerful vibration in the air. Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come to Vegas to see a show, to maybe get a glimpse of her idol. But she had received something far more precious, a lesson in authenticity, a glimpse into the heart of an artist, and a powerful inspiration for her own musical journey. This sound check wasn't just a rehearsal, it was a revelation, a turning point in her understanding of what truly made music powerful. The rest of the sound check proceeded with a renewed energy. Elvis, seemingly unburdened by his earlier moment of vulnerability, ran through several more songs from his set list. He was sharp, focused, engaging with the band, offering precise directions to the sound engineer. Casualness was gone, replaced by a professional intensity. But it was a different kind of intensity now. It wasn't born of weariness, but of a quiet, profound conviction. He still tested his vocals, adjusted his monitors, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a lightness in his movements, a deeper resonance in his voice, as if that intimate, unrehearsed performance of amazing grace had recalibrated him, brought him back to his center. He was fully present, fully in the music. Sarah went about her tasks, her movements automatic, but her mind was reeling. She helped move equipment, stacked chairs, and polished surfaces, her hands working while her brain processed the emotional whirlwind she had just experienced. Every chord the band played, every note Elvis sang seemed to carry a deeper meaning now, filtered through the lens of that raw, unscripted moment. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, kept her busy. He pointed out technical details, explaining why certain microphones were used for specific instruments, or the purpose of different lighting rigs. Sarah listened, absorbing the practical knowledge, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the true magic she'd witnessed. When the sound check finally concluded, Elvis clapped his hands together, once a sharp, decisive sound. "All right, fellas, that's it. Let's hit it hard tonight." He gave a quick wave to the crew, and then, with his entourage, he was gone, disappearing through the stage door as quickly as he had appeared. The aura remained, a faint hum in the air. The stage immediately burst into a flurry of activity. Crew members began making final adjustments, setting up water bottles, towels, and last-minute props for the evening show. The atmosphere was one of controlled anticipation, the calm before the storm of thousands of cheering fans. Sarah found herself near the side of the stage, helping a crew member coil a thick electrical cable. She still felt a little dazed, as if she were walking through a dream. Mr. Henderson walked up to her, holding 2 cold sodas. He handed one to her. "You did good today, Jenkins. Kept busy." Sarah gratefully took the soda, the cool can a welcome sensation against her warm palm. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." He took a long sip of his own soda, his eyes scanning the bustling stage. "Not every day you see something like that, huh?" he murmured, almost as if he could read her thoughts. He didn't elaborate, but Sarah knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't talking about the usual sound check. "No, sir," she replied softly. He just grunted again. But this time it was a sound of quiet approval. He's something else, that man. A lot of pressure. But when he finds the music, there's nothing like it. Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. Mr. Henderson, gruff as he was, understood. He had seen the private moments, the real artist behind the spectacle. As the afternoon wore on, and her shift neared its end, Sarah felt a profound shift within herself. The excitement of seeing Elvis, the thrill of being backstage, was still there. But it was overlaid with something deeper, more significant. Her purpose felt clearer. She hadn't just gotten closer to her idol. She had seen the core of his artistry, the vulnerability that fueled his power. Her own guitar tucked away in her room called to her with a new urgency. It wasn't just about playing catchy tunes or writing clever lyrics anymore. It was about finding her own truth, her own raw honesty, and pouring it into her music. Elvis had shown her that the most powerful performances weren't always the loudest or the most flamboyant. Sometimes they were the quietest, the most vulnerable, the ones born from a moment of struggle and a desperate need to connect. She imagined herself one day standing on a stage, perhaps a much smaller one than this grand ballroom, but facing an audience with the same kind of emotional courage Elvis had shown during Amazing Grace. She knew it would be terrifying, exposing so much of herself, but she also knew now that it was the only way to truly connect, to truly create music that resonated, music that mattered. Leaving the backstage area, the cool air of the public spaces felt different. The glitz and glamour of Vegas seemed less overwhelming, less distracting. Sarah felt grounded, centered, armed with a new understanding of art and authenticity. Her journey as a musician, she realized, had truly just begun. That night, as Sarah sat in the vast packed ballroom, the air thick with anticipation, she felt a different kind of thrill. She was no longer just a stagehand, she was an audience member holding her precious ticket, one of thousands waiting for the king. But now she carried a secret knowledge, a deeper understanding of the man behind the legend. The house lights dimmed and the crowd erupted in a thunderous roar. The opening strains of the 2001 A Space Odyssey theme swelled through the speakers, building to a dizzying crescendo. Then, bathed in a single spotlight, Elvis Presley burst onto the stage. He was magnificent. Dressed in a dazzling white jumpsuit, adorned with sequins and a high collar, he moved with an almost supernatural grace. He was the king, the showman, the icon. He greeted the crowd with his signature pose, a dazzling smile, and the screams intensified. The band launched into CC Rider, and Elvis immediately commanded the stage. His hips swiveled, his arms gestured, his voice boomed through the hall, powerful and matic. He worked the crowd, throwing scarves, sharing jokes, radiating an energy that was almost blinding. Sarah watched, captivated, but with a new perspective. She saw the flash, the spectacle, the incredible artistry of his performance. But beneath it, she also saw the raw, vulnerable man she had witnessed during the sound check. She saw the moments where his eyes, even behind the stage lights, seemed to hold a deeper emotion, a connection that went beyond the dazzling performance. She knew the wellspring from which that power truly flowed. When he sang Suspicious Minds, every move, every vocal inflection was perfect, honed by years of practice and perfected in countless sound checks. Sarah could hear the subtle nuances, the way he poured his heart into the lyrics, knowing now the depth of emotion that fueled it. When he delivered a powerful gospel number, her mind went back to Amazing Grace. That quiet, unscripted moment of pure faith and raw vulnerability. The public performance was magnificent, but the private sound check had been the true unvarnished soul of the artist. He moved through his set a whirlwind of rock and roll, tender ballads and soulful gospel. Each song was a testament to his incredible range, his stage presence, and his unwavering connection to the music. The crowd was on its feet, cheering, singing along, completely enthralled. Sarah found herself cheering too, her hands clapping, but her heart was full of a quieter, more profound appreciation. She wasn't just a fan enjoying a show, she was a student, learning from a master. She understood that the glitz and the glamour were part of the package, the necessary vehicle for a performer of his magnitude. But the true power, the core of his genius, lay in his ability to be utterly, uncompromisingly real, even in the most manufactured environment. As the concert neared its end, and Elvis took his final bows bathed in a sea of applause and flashbulbs, Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't sadness that it was over, but a profound sense of gratitude and inspiration. She had come seeking a dream, and she had found something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of artistry, authenticity, and the true meaning of power. She left the ballroom walking through the vibrant electric city that hummed with life, but her own internal world felt quieter, more purposeful. The noise of Vegas faded into the background. Her guitar, waiting for her in her modest room, felt heavier, imbued with a new significance. Sarah knew that her own musical journey would be long and challenging. There would be no sold-out arenas, no dazzling jumpsuits. At least not yet. But she carried with her the memory of that sound check, the raw, unpolished, breathtaking honesty of Elvis Presley, singing Amazing Grace. It was a secret performance, witnessed by only a few. But for Sarah, it was the most powerful, most moving, and most profoundly inspiring performance of his career. She returned to Ohio a few days later, but she wasn't the same girl who had left. She was still Sarah, the aspiring no-cur. But now she carried within her a quiet fire, a deep understanding of what it truly meant to connect through music. She opened her guitar case, picked up her beloved acoustic, and began to play. Her fingers found a new melody, and words filled with vulnerability and hope began to flow. King had shown her the way not through his crown, but through his heart. And her own legacy, however small, had just begun to take its first powerful notes.